We don't need to be playing out these cycles, but your body is literally addicted to feeling these emotions. Don't break up with a person, break up with a pattern instead. Because every conflict is an opportunity for deeper connection. I'm not here to be a friend. I'm here to wake you up.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Make Men Great Again podcast. I've got a very special guest here who's flown in from Newcastle, Nerida Bint. Welcome to the Make Men Great Again podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be here in Noosa.
My pleasure. We've been gifted some semi-decent weather today. Yeah. On the plus side, it's not too hot.
Yes.
And at the same time, it's not bucketing down, raining as well and interfering our sound quality here.
Yeah, I'm glad I brought the sunshine with me.
Yes. I don't know too much about Newcastle, so I'm not sure what the weather's like, but nonetheless, I'm glad that you bought it. So I'd like to just jump straight in if that's cool with you. I'm a no fuss, no muss type of guy. So I like to go in deep. We were kind of talking off camera and I was like, okay, cool. Like if we could just gift the listeners today who were giving us their time, of course, we're going to go into drop some bombs today. It's going to be awesome. But if you could gift them one thing that, if they just got that one thing that would really land for them, maybe it's something that you've learned or that you've seen from working with, men and women, what would that one thing be that if you were to kind of gift them to that would, impact their lives in a positive way?
After coaching and working with people on a very intimate level for the last, couple of years, I'm a different person and I now really understand, and I wish people understood this more. The first 0 to 7 years of your life is a program that you will run on automatically and that will impact every relationship, every job that you work in, every business that you create, your parenting. It's how influential and how your emotions that you felt most in those first 7 years dictate the rest of your life until you wake up to it. Now,
as you're saying that, what my mind is going to is, you're completely right, Nerida, but you know what? I think in this day and age, I think a lot of people hear that, but then what I don't think happens is I don't think people really truly understand to the depth that you're actually meaning, right? So a lot of people hear that. We've heard it. We've seen the Instagram clips, the TikToks. We've maybe followed someone who's got the holistic psychologist, something like that. We might have seen it, but you know that it's different when it lands. So what would you, if we were to land that plane for the listeners right now, what is it that you would share with them in order to really let that land? Could you give maybe some examples of a particular thing that would happen either for you or for a client or a general scenario that would really get them to kind of paint that picture and really see in their own lives, maybe that thing, maybe that's going on for me.
So I think it's so interesting that you say that, because I really believe that generally as a society, we're quite emotionally immature. So I think we've come a long way. We're still growing. But I think if you ask any man or woman on any given day, how are you actually feeling today? Most people give you a very surface level answer. Most people don't actually know how to articulate, I'm feeling really confused. I'm feeling really lost. I'm feeling stuck. I'm feeling exhausted. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Most people don't even have that first, attunement with themselves.
Yes.
So what I would say is, if any part of your life isn't working out the way that you wish it was, whether that be your relationship, the amount of money that you're making in your business, your job, the way that you're parenting, the way that you feel around your kids, your mental health, your physical health. If anything is just feeling a little bit off and you wish it was different, it is because you are addicted to certain emotions that you felt most between 0 and 7.
So you're saying what you can do is use your present life. So your life and your reality is a mirror, right?
100%.
It's 100% a mirror. So if you're looking at the 3 key areas that we all want to, be great in or be successful in, is, health, wealth and relationships, your typical standards, and they have their own variants, right?
Yeah.
But if someone's watching this right now and they're going, you know what? I'm overweight, my health isn't good, or you know what, my finances, I don't care about being a multi-millionaire, but I'm struggling month to month. I can't go on the holidays I want. I don't feel like I could take time off if I wanted to. Or in my relationship, no, I'm not having the level of intimacy that I want. I'm not feeling respected. We would look at those as mirrors and go, okay, Nerida's saying 0 to 7 years creates the programs, and you probably don't realize that everything outside of yourself is a reflection not just of your habits and your discipline or things, but one layer deeper.
Your beliefs.
And
your emotions.
Your emotions. Yep. So we're talking about things like attachment styles. Is that what you're saying?
No. So essentially what I'm saying is that your childhood experience, and everyone has a different childhood experience, right? But what I will say is this. When you look at the broad spectrum of emotions, we have primary and secondary emotions. So your primary emotions are things like love, joy, and then your anger, fear, sadness. So when I'm talking about being stuck, we're usually stuck in some of those heavier emotions, right? So none of them are good or bad. They just are.
Yes.
And so they're directives, like they're data for us to look at to start to redirect our life.
Yes, correct.
So fear, sadness, anger. Now, off that, you have your secondary emotions. So off of fear, we have insecurity, inferiority, inadequacy, anxiety, nervousness. You get what I mean?
100%.
Off sadness, you have loneliness, neglect, depression. Off of anger, you have frustration, resentment, So how often...
I don't mean to cut you off. You're saying this stuff and I'm laughing because I'm like, man, it doesn't matter how old that I get or how many years I've done this work. Every time I've been focusing more on different things recently, but then when you revisit stuff like this, it lands differently because you're experiencing it from a different place in your life. So I'm just like going, it reminded me of this picture my dad showed me of this tree. I'm not sure if you've seen that. I think it's like something that you learn in, like, my dad was doing like a counseling course. And it was like a tree, and it had, those primary things as like, I think they were like the branches. There was the trunk, which is you, and then there was like the branches, which is like, say, the sadness or the main key. I think you called them primary.
Yep.
And then all of the leaves that came off those branches were the secondary ones, which is like, you can imagine the branch of sadness.
Yep.
If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes right now, you're not going to get me using my hands, and then those little leaves of sadness, loneliness.
Yes.
I think that's a beautiful picture to paint. So again, people can trace that back as they're listening to this.
And so what happens is, I see people who, what do we see the most in society right now? We see a lot of young people and people in general suffering from two things, anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
But when you draw that back, I see the same things over and over and over. So most people, and I typically work with women, you work with men.
Yep.
So most women that I work with that struggle with anxiety as an adult experienced a lot of chaos and insecurity as a child. So instability.
Yep.
So it makes so much sense. If you experienced a lot of instability, you will become hypervigilant to wanting stability. You crave that your entire life. And so what do a lot of people do when you feel so powerless as a child? What do you naturally go into as an adult to relieve that? You go into control. And this is where this is important, because this is how women play out control with their partnerships. They go into over masculinized, controlling, domineering personas because they're trying to relieve that fear that they feel within them. If you're an adult and you identify as being maybe having depression, that's oftentimes because you didn't have enough connection and you were quite neglected and you didn't have that love and attention that you needed from a parent growing up. So it makes so much sense that you're still craving that connection, but you can't be connected to somebody else if you haven't even learned how to connect to yourself. And that was my story, right? So I was diagnosed with depression at 22. I really thought I suffered with suicidal thoughts my entire life. And about 8 years ago, I sort of took steps to try and act that out.
Wow.
And, so I really can relate to that, right? I grew, and a lot of people that experience depression grew up with a lot of shame. So I grew up with a lot of internal shame. And so, and then you've got your anger, right? So anger is like buried resentment, overstepping boundaries, needs not being met. So what I want to do is to help people to understand how to, first of all, connect to their emotions and understand them and attune to them, and then understand how to give themselves what they need so that they can move through them to live happier, more joyful, connected lives. Because we don't need to be playing out these cycles, but your body is literally addicted to feeling these emotions until you start to learn how to give yourself what you need, reparent yourself, and start to, look at the gaps that weren't filled in childhood. And a lot of people struggle with this because they might be quite defensive of their parents, right? They might go into defensive-ness and say, no, I had really good parents. My parents loved me. Guess what? My parents loved me too. I know that. And yet I was left feeling that, we can love someone and also leave them feeling unloved by us too sometimes.
First off.
Sorry.
Some bombs dropped there. Yeah, we get the claps out.
Yes, I love that.
So thank you for sharing that. Very powerful stuff, and relate to. I'm just nodding.
Yes.
I'm almost reliving my journey of the realization that I had that you're sharing now. Obviously, it's been a few years now, and lots of healing's been done, but yeah, it's kind of really brought back those feelings of when I first started to kind of awaken to this stuff, and how life-changing that it was to realize that there was, number one, something I could do about it. Because if I can understand it, Nerida, I'm like, I can use my mastermind to map it out and, figure it all out and I feel like I've got the power to do something about it. It's not what happened to me. It's what I'm making that mean. And something that really stood out just to the, towards the end of what you were sharing was you shared that, your parents, you might say, well, they loved me, and of course they most likely did, and they loved you the best they could. But in those early years, 0 to 7, our brain, we don't have emotional intelligence. We don't even have that level of consciousness to be able to, I don't know the technical or psychological, jargon or the way to describe this, but in my words, to be able to separate how you feel, and a lot of adults don't have this skill, by the way, and what's actually happening. So as a child, it's your parents love you. They leave you at school because they're running late and because they're trying to put food on the table and something happens, but you make it mean that only they mustn't love me. And that thought in your mind gets,
Well, I'll tell you why that is. Okay, so when we're in childhood, we're always seeking, we're maturing, right? And so sorry, I don't know. There we go. That's better.
Much.
So in childhood, we're constantly developing physically and emotionally, right? So, and what we actually need emotionally is we need to experience, we need to go through our experience and to have having a parent that's most of our self-worth is derived by two people, our mother and our father. Yeah. And we need them to be witness to our emotional sort of, responses to life without judgment, without taking love away. And what typically happens now, what would be interesting, right? And this is what I find so fascinating. The reason why we make things mean something in adulthood because it meant something in childhood. So I find this really interesting. My emotional home, so the emotions that I mostly felt between 0 and 7 were rejection, shame, loneliness, sadness, and confusion. Okay? My father and I played out, a really traumatized, wounded dynamic. And so that was how I was often left feeling by him. Now I know a lot about him and his childhood. It makes sense, okay? He passed that down. Now, other people might have different emotional responses. So for me, what's most painful for me, when I see someone, if someone was to look at me and to pretend not to see me or look at me with disgust, look at me in a way where I was bad, that would be the most wounding thing that could ever happen to me. Why? Because it transports me straight back to that time when I was 7 and, I came home late from a play date and, Dad told me to sit outside and stay on the step because I was late and I was naughty when actually I'd been lost trying to find my home and I was scared and all I wanted was safety. Now, but for you, it might be something completely different. Yeah. What I often notice with men is they seek more freedom. So men, and this often happens when a mother doesn't, in parenting, the way we want to parent our kids is there are two sides of any sort of anywhere we want to be, right? There's codependence, then there's independence. We want to raise our kids down the middle, which is interdependence. So at the moment, your little girl, she's quite dependent on you, right? She needs you to feed her. She needs you to put her to bed. She needs you to pick her up, put her down. She's quite dependent on you. As she gets older and older and older, her independence will naturally start to grow. So as that happens, she will need you less and less. And this is a good thing, right? When you ask any parent, how do you want to raise your kids? I would argue that most of us should be thinking we want to raise our kids to be happy, healthy, secure, confident, and independent. And so as she starts to move through that process, she wants to essentially go out into the world and start to figure things out and learn her lessons and make her mistakes without too much interference from you. And yet she still has the safety net of falling back on you. Now, what I see a lot of men struggle with is maybe an overbearing mother who didn't really quite know how to, you know, allow that separation from her. And so it plays out in that overly, you know, codependent nature, and then they play that dynamic out with their partners. So
say that piece again, because I think that's important.
Yes.
Just that last little pocket.
Yeah. So if you had a mother that was overbearing, overly enmeshed in your life and overly, you know, maybe controlling, or, you know, didn't understand how to actually let you become, how to let go, you'll play that dynamic out. You'll be attracted to a woman who will energetically remind you of her mother, of your mother, and that will play out in your relationships, and you will feel suffocated, overwhelmed.
Because it's familiar.
Exactly. We always seek what is familiar because it reminds us of our family of origin.
Even if it, you know, it's the saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't, even if it's damaging.
It's actually not about that, right? What you're trying to do is close the loop. You're trying to heal that wound from childhood, but you're seeking something similar, but you deep down want it to change, because if it changes and it becomes whole, it means that you're worthy.
From a spiritual lens, rather than say a psychological lens, we would probably say that you were almost, not necessarily every relationship, but exactly to that point, you're getting gifted that opportunity to close that loop, whether that's the person you're going to do it with. It might take you 3 or 4 people to do, but that's almost like, part of that spiritual journey of healing is to be given those relationships so that you can do that. I mean, my wife and I are probably a pretty good example, because we definitely represent each other's wounds. You know,
of course,
wounds.
You always
Just want to take a quick moment to break out of the podcast episode right now and just let you know that if you can subscribe to this channel, it will go a long way. We have a clear mission and movement to make men great again. And to do that, I can't do it by myself. I need you guys to do it too. And how we can do that is by more people signing up to this channel. That allows us to get more people onto the podcast, and that allows us to share this message about mass media, about marriage, about money, about mindset, about healing, so that more men can be great again and ultimately impact the world. So be a part of the mission, subscribe to the channel. We release episodes every Monday, and I'm sure that you're going to find it really valuable. So if you've found that you've enjoyed it so far, take a chance, subscribe to this channel. Goes a long way. We're really grateful. And anyways, back to the episode.
Attract someone who fits your wounds perfectly.
100%. But what's interesting is that definitely, of course, I probably would have done that with other relationships, but she was just the first person who's been on a spiritual and personal development journey. So, you know, takes 2 to tango. You can't be the one person doing the work in the relationship while the other person's not interested in doing the work. Because even if they do it, but you kind of force them to do it, it doesn't exactly, you know.
Well, this is why so much couples counselling doesn't work, is because most couples, when they finally get to that point where they need support, they're both at different points. One person is to change your childhood patterns and to change yourself requires such accountability and responsibility. Like, you have to be so determined and so ready.
Such vulnerability.
Yeah. And you need to really, really be looking at yourself and wanting to know, what is it about me that keeps creating this dynamic that's not working? And one person's usually there, like, I'm really ready to take responsibility, and the other person just doesn't want to lose the relationship. Very different.
Yeah.
So it's I see that a lot into, and you think about it, right? To get to that point where you're really, really ready for change, it's not a lot of people ever get there. To get two people at that point in that relationship is challenging.
That's actually a very good point.
And sometimes you don't get to that point until you're really ready, until you lose someone.
Yeah.
That was the story for me, right? 4 years ago, as the pandemic hit, you know, here in Australia, I owned a couple of women's only gyms. I was in a relationship with a man who I was deeply in love with, but was feeling unloved by me because we were playing out that, you know, I was so controlling because of all my pain from childhood I had not healed. And yet I was reminding him of his mother because I was constantly controlling him, constantly overstepping boundaries. I was hypercritical, hyper negative. And it wasn't until all of that happened and I was living in a unit by myself in the middle of lockdown, business is closed, my accountant saying to me, I think you're going to go bankrupt.
Wow.
That I remember thinking to myself, what's going on right now? Why is this not working for me? Why do I keep finding myself in these relationships? And it wasn't until I did that work on myself. And he said to me at the time, he said, Nerida,
your partner?
my ex, he said, I feel like I'm not good enough for you. And I thought he meant I was too good for him. 6 months later, I was at a barbecue and I remember at that time feeling so confused. We both loved each other, but we just couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
And I remember 6 months later, I'd been with some friends and they were married and he'd been a bit of a player. And I remember asking him, I said, what is it about her that made you choose her? Because I just became fascinated by relationships.
You asked you asked your ex-partner?
No. I asked my two good friends.
Oh.
I wasn't in touch with my ex at all. I was
Just
on
two
holiday.
male friends?
A male and a female.
Gotcha.
But I was asking him, what is it about Sophie that made you want to propose to her? Because
Can quit the player life.
yes,
Gotcha.
yes.
I'm with you.
What was it that finally made you?
Yeah.
And he said to me, Nez, she's the first woman that I ever met that I knew was too good for me that never made me feel that way. And that was such an epiphany of a moment for me because all of those moments came flooding back of me criticizing my ex, controlling him, judging him, but that was all wounded stuff within me that I'd been carrying all
But
this.
it was probably most likely his deepest wounds because that's what had happened to him. So you can imagine.
Well, no, funnily enough.
Okay.
This is so interesting, right? This is where we really get deeper. 6 months prior, his parents had come down to stay with us. They drove a van around Australia and they were staying with us. And I remember his mum driving me mad. I remember looking at his father thinking, geez, you're such a good man. You're such a good man. And I was watching her and she would trigger me so much. And what it was she never used to criticize her son, but she was hypercritical and judgmental of her husband. And so that's
in front of the son.
That's right. And that's where the wound plays out, right? So that's what was painful for him. When I started criticizing and judging him, that was reminding him of his parents and the dynamic that was playing out there. But yet, and neither of us knew this at the time because I was completely unaware of this. It wasn't until months later I looked back and I realized, wow, that was exactly why we were attracted to each other, but yet they were both of our wounds that we needed to work through.
Yeah.
And so energetically, that dynamic felt natural to him initially until it felt painful. And same for me, right? I was looking for like someone to give me love because I didn't have love in childhood.
Yes.
But it was just a cup that could never be filled. No matter what he did, it was never enough.
And when you say, just to be picky with your words here, because I think just to get what you meant, you said when you weren't loved, do you mean when you didn't feel loved? By your so your parents were not. I mean, not everyone's parents are loving. There's a reality of some people in the world where parents. It's probably very few. So we won't go into that so much. But your parents did love you, but your experience was that you didn't feel loved, and so that was your wound that hadn't been healed. And at what 30? What age were you then?
30. I was 37.
So at 37, you're inner child, that 0 to 7 year old you is getting triggered the crap out of everything that's kind of going on. And that's when you're resorting to those more, you shared like those more controlling behaviors.
Well, essentially what it is I like to tell people, think about the yin yang symbol, right? So you've got half that's black with a white dot, half that's white with a black dot. Now imagine that's the masculine, feminine.
Yeah.
Most of us have pain in childhood. And we go into looking for a partnership and we think that person's going to take our pain away. And we fall in love. And for a while it does because all of a sudden we're having all those, all the
oxytocin
hormones, the chemicals.
and,
We're in love. This is so amazing.
Honeymoon period.
All of a sudden I feel so good until all of a sudden you don't. So 6 to 18 months down the track, everywhere you go, there you are. All of a sudden, this person becomes natural and normal to have in your life. They don't bring you that same sort of endorphin hit that it used to. So all that old stuff starts to come up, all that loneliness, all that pain, everything from childhood starts to surface. And what most people do is they think, oh, here I am feeling this way.
This is this person's
must
fault.
be your fault. But actually, no, it's your work. So that's what was happening for me.
Yeah.
When I met my partner, all that pain got to be forgotten about for a little while. But really, and I realized, I remember going
suppressed.
I remember going to the toilet one night. We'd been together for 2.5 years. And I remember feeling really miserable and thinking to myself, wow, I'm feeling really sad. Maybe this relationship isn't the right relationship for me. But do you know what's funny? I have actually always felt that way.
Yeah.
I felt
what's the common denominator? Is it this guy
Exactly.
or is it me and the feelings that I've got?
That's right. I had always actually felt that way, but I did not want to take responsibility. So I was projecting that pain outward onto my partner. And this is what so many people do when we don't know how to tune into ourselves emotionally. And this looks like every single day. Wow, these are the emotions that I'm feeling. Being able to do that and actually accept it, not judge it, and actually feel safe to share it. What we will naturally do is project that outwards or leak it outwards in unhealthy ways.
Yeah, a big one, something that's just stood out for me is like to add to what you said is the ability to discern instead of identify. Because like I know for me, I mean, I could tell you a million stories about all the different feelings and emotions and things, but one that really stood out for me in relationships was feeling that nothing I ever do, and a lot of men are going to go,
inadequacy.
Nothing I ever do is ever good enough. Nothing I ever do is ever good enough.
Who made you first feel like that?
Well,
Mum or dad?
I'm just trying to think.
Where did you first learn that?
I don't know when I first learned it. If I look back at, and again, my parents are very loving, but if I look back at my personal experience, I would say I got it from probably both of them. I can't recall in this very moment. I'm sure if I sat down and wasn't on camera and could really tune into it, that I'm sure I'd be able to tap into it. But
so, okay, you can go on another thread, right? Because a lot of people, when they're adults and their parents are like actively involved in their lives, it's really confusing, right? But we need actually a lot of presence to build our self-worth. And we need our parents to be, you know what's really interesting?
Yeah, and that's what I didn't have,
Exactly.
right? So for me, my mum she's just not as I love her to bits, love you, mum.
Of course.
She just probably wasn't as nurturing as I would have liked.
Yes. Yeah.
And go figure, her mum didn't have nurturing birth.
Exactly.
Same thing my dad.
It's a
Both
pattern.
my parents were absent.
Yeah.
They were still married, but they were
Just
completely emotionally
distant.
completely 10 times what my
Yes.
parents were, right?
So this is the funny thing, right? And this is what we have to honor. Like our parents are breaking cycles, right?
Yes.
But obviously we have more information to this sort of work now than they ever did. We have more information than a king or a president did 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So they were in survival mode,
it's
right?
not just shun them. They just literally did the best that they could at the time.
Of course. And they still did break cycles, right?
Yes.
Like, maybe some of them were raised in abuse or poverty. But what we have to understand is right now, I wish more parents understood this. If you really want to build self-worth in your children and you want them to grow up feeling good inside, the best thing you can do is literally be joyful in their presence. Laughter, eye contact, play, physical touch, presence, and they need so much of it from 0 to 18.
Yeah.
And I worry because we live in a society where people are overworked, they're stressed, they're burnt out. And so the capacity to give that to the kids is diminishing. And just, people, this might trigger a lot of parents. Take from this what you will. Yeah. But I guarantee you, I will die on this hill every day of the week. And so if you're sitting there saying, but Nerida, how do we fight? We both have to work, That's not my decision to make. Your decision, you decided to have children. It's up to you to ask yourself, okay, we took this responsibility on. What is this? Is the lifestyle that we're living conducive to them becoming happy, healthy, secure, kind, loving adults.
Well, that, as I shared with you off camera as I was making a coffee earlier, that was the decision that I made 18 months ago or however long it was ago, going, you know what, my child is the most important thing in my life. And if I keep running the business the way I'm running it, I'm not going to be able to be the father or the husband that I want to be. And that's my number one priority. I can make money in a million different ways. And like I said, I think that you're laying some smack down for some people. But the reality is we're not saying that it's easy. What I'm saying is that it's worth it.
Totally.
And that if you really do have a goal, instead of just going, oh, it's hard and, oh, well, everybody suffers and using those kind of excuses, it's going, hey, in my heart of hearts, what do I want for my child? If I close my eyes and envision the life that I want for them, I want to teach them how to be healthy and have a good relationship with food, so that they don't suffer. Like I was the guy in the t-shirt with the in the pool and the t-shirt on, and weight issues that plagued my self-confidence for 20 years. I don't want to give that to my child. Oh, same thing with money. Same thing with those three key areas, relationships. I know when Ellis and I, we don't do this on purpose, but it's just we've got a very loving relationship. I'll hold her, I'll pick her up, or I'll dance with her in the kitchen, or something will go on. And Lily's face, she'll be like eating breakfast. She'll just start giggling and lighting up. And in that moment, I'm like, wow, I can go back to that time where I was making lots of money, but I was looking down the barrel of knowing that I wouldn't be able to show up in the way that I show up now because I was just constantly thinking about work.
Yeah. So you're unable to be present to your family.
I'm unable to be present with my family. In those moments, I go back and I go, wow, like you made that was a scary decision, but you made such a great decision. It's those moments that I feel most joy and most pride. But I also can relate to the fact that was a very, very challenging decision. I'm very lucky that I have a very loving and supporting wife, and also invested a lot in different skill sets that allow for chopping and changing.
But you've also done a lot of work on yourself to build that relationship, to build the life that you want. And, there's a great quote.
And even choose a healthy partner.
That's right.
That's a big thing, Instead of choosing a partner from your wounds.
Exactly.
Choosing it from, I chose my wife purely based on a spiritual, on my intuition. Yeah. And that whole first 6 months was me literally week by week going, I don't like what this. I don't think I can do this.
Yeah.
What my ego wanted and what she was, and the early stages while I was still attached to that. Yeah. But I would my intuition was like, just one more day, Scott. Just one more day. And then over time, I'm so grateful that I listened to that part and not the other part.
Yeah. Because it's easy to run away. It's easy to not do the work. It's so much
easy to go back to what's familiar
much easier.
And what feels safe and what you think that you want. And that's what I was saying before. The difference between discernment, being able to pause for a moment, take a breath and check in. Oh, is this? That's why the knowledge piece that you're sharing today is so important, because without that, it's very difficult to have discernment, because you can't have that. Okay, well, is this a program that's running? When have I felt like this in my past? Is it like, who's the common denominator here? Is it this person that I'm dating?
Yeah, there's
or is it me? Oh, I think it could be me. Okay, well then maybe I shouldn't break up with this girl or this man right now. Maybe I shouldn't go and sleep with somebody else or do something to destroy this relationship because I'm too afraid to do the work. Maybe I should just pull on that string a little bit and see if there's some stuff I can unravel and do the work myself.
Well, yeah, there's a great quote. Don't break up with a person, break up with a pattern instead. And it's like you'll keep, if you keep breaking up with that person that actually feels quite familiar, you'll just keep attracting that same familiarity in a new person, and it'll be fine for the first 6 to 12 months, and then all of a sudden that same pain will pop back up. Yeah. So it's within you, and that's your unresolved pain from childhood. Yeah. And so it's such an ego death to go back and to actually do that work. But the more that we do this, the more that we raise emotionally intelligent children, because we can then be present emotionally to them. And what you're actually talking about there is like you being able to be joyful in front of your daughter and to bring that peace and joy into your home. That is such medicine for society. Like we have a society of people.
Love that word, by the way, medicine.
It is medicine. When I have my niece and nephew with me, I'm always thinking, how can I bring more laughter, joy and playfulness? we do this thing, right, where I just in my head I think I'm just going to stretch out the laughter.
Yeah.
One of them will crack a joke, we'll all laugh a little bit, and then that'll be it. It'll be like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then we just go quiet, and then I just start giggling again, and then everyone starts laughing again, and then we go quiet. And then I just giggle again, and I just stretch it out, and all of a sudden we're laughing for like 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That is such medicine to their nervous system when they've been at school all day and they've been out and about and they're with, they're with other people that don't care about and love them as much as their family do. And then all of a sudden they come home and they need to regulate and they need to process, and laughter and love and connection is the best way to do that. Yeah. And so, going back to your point around parenting and the way that you live your life, I'll say to any parent, if you show me your core values and show me your calendar, and if they line up, then great, you should be pretty happy with how you're living your life. But if you tell me that your number one priority and value is your family, and yet you're working 60 hours a week, I would challenge you. And I don't care if you don't like me for that. Yeah. I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to wake you up, because I've had so many women and men that I've worked with who've sat back and heard this truth and gone away and made changes instantly. And what that does for their children's lives is profound. Yeah.
And even if you just want to be selfish for a moment and you're at the stage where you're just stressed and like you're really viscerally in the present moment, but not in a good way, being present. I mean, just like when you're really, really stressed and you can't think about anyone else, you're just surviving.
You're in survival, yeah.
So if you're surviving right now, wherever you are on listening to this podcast, and you're not thinking about the kids and the wife or whatever those other things seem like, of course you want to do that, but right now you're just coping with yourself. I feel the passion and the power in the way that you shared that.
If you don't like me for that,
let that resonate in your heart to at least make the changes. If you can't think about anybody else, and just from a selfish perspective, if you're not feeling good, if you're not if your calendar and your core values are matching up, then you're probably going to feel reasonably fulfilled. Meaning that, of course, you might have few things you don't like every here and there, but generally you're going to be enjoying what you're doing. Is if you're in a job that you don't like, you're not feeling like you're energetically paid for the skills that you're bringing in whatever that thing is, you don't like something, it's you're not going to feel very good. And changes need to be had. So let's go into changes for a second, because a lot of people, I've made a lot of different transitions in my life at different stages. Every couple of years I'll kind of go through a kind of another ego death. And I'm probably more of an extreme person, but I see a lot of people that just, on the other end, they don't do any, they just work and they don't really make those changes. And a lot of people ask me, how do you do it? For me, it's fucking hard. And the pattern for me is usually that I'm just really in tune with myself and I'm not liking what I'm doing, and then I just feel like, okay, I've got to make a change, and then I will procrastinate on it, then I'll get angry with myself, and then at some point it'll just happen and then it's done and I just make big decisions, right? But I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but it's worked for me so far. But a lot of people, they struggle to make changes. We're giving them information, we're giving them knowledge, they're listening in their car, they're watching at home on YouTube, however they're doing it, right? And they're going, wow, I'm feeling this, but I've heard this, maybe I've heard this before, or maybe I've heard something like it. Maybe I've felt this, but I've still done nothing about it. Why do you think people do nothing about it? And what would you share to make this podcast, this conversation, be a difference for those people? I'm holding out a pistol because I'm shooting this at everybody.
Yeah, well, we don't change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the desire to change. So if people aren't changing, it's usually they're choosing what they're not changing. So they're not quite in enough pain to make that happen. And so their time will come. It'll come. And that's where I was at when I was in that lockdown, that breakup. I remember years prior going to Tony Robbins and hearing him talk about the emotional home, and some of it was resonating, and there was a little part of me that was like, oh, I've got some stuff here I need to look at, but I was like, nah, I just wasn't ready. And it wasn't until that breakup and that extreme pain that I was like, oh my God, I need to look at myself. So taking radical responsibility, it's something that you can't, it's like wearing a blindfold,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden the blindfold is lifted and you see it. You can't see it until you're ready. And whether that happens for you at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, or you go to your grave, who knows? But I'm so like, there are parts of me that wish it had happened sooner in my life, but then there are parts of me that are so grateful it happened at all. And there's a great quote, instead of judging the ignorance, celebrate the awakening.
Yeah, I love that.
I've got that now, but if you're sort of don't know where to start, you know, I think the biggest thing is for me, like I was in the middle of a lockdown. I was trying to support 15 staff. You know, I had no money. I could not afford to see a psychologist or anything like that, which I had done previously. I read a book a week. I read every single book. I listened to podcasts. I listened to YouTube. I meditated. I exercised. I was just so hell-bent on creating change. I just was so like at that dark night of the soul. I would do anything. And I see people all the time come to me, you know, and say, we're, you know, a couple, we're in a tight spot, we're really struggling, we've got kids, but we can't afford a therapist. And I'm like, there is so much out there that's free. You obviously don't want it enough if you're not looking for that. Yeah. If you've got a phone, you've got basic access to free therapy. Like there is no excuse. So download, like, you know, I have a rule of 3, right? So if I hear a book 3 times and it sort of spurts, like,
you mean like on someone like somebody's, you hear it on a podcast, or you see it on Instagram.
You've talked about the book Wave the Superior Man, right? If you're a man and you're listening to this and the stuff that you're saying is resonating, and you're sitting here saying, I read this book and it helped me, but chances are you might read that book and it might resonate for you too. Yeah. So I think that you've got to, there's a great quote, go to where it's warm, the people, the places and the experiences. For me, that when I started following that, like that curiosity, that's what really led me down that path. I think the first book I give any client is How to Do the Work by the holistic psychologist. Yeah. Changed my life.
It's such a thorough, it's a very thorough book.
It is. And it helps you understand how
breaks it down very well.
Yeah. And what she does is she really helps you understand how your childhood influences your thoughts and beliefs.
All the stuff we spoke about earlier. So if you want to know more about this stuff, obviously follow Nerida. We'll talk about that later. But definitely get that book. We've got that one, and I think my wife's also got the shadow work one and something about love. Yeah,
How to Be the Love You Seek.
How to Be the Love You Seek is the one she just got as well.
So I think if it can just start by reading a book, like listening to a podcast, like, you know, there'll be something that will lead you to it, and it's just one day at a time, showing up for yourself and starting to build that relationship with yourself. Because most people suffer from one thing, right? We think that we're not worthy. We think we're either not worthy of success,
not enough.
We're not good enough, and this is because of our childhood, right? It's because we did not have that love, attention. You know, we did not experience enough joy and freedom and contentment in childhood.
And so to bring this back, a few things just popped into my mind. So going back to what we were saying at the start with if your reality, be it health, wealth, or relationship, is not where you want it to be, you can either wait until your wife's left you, everything's falling apart, and you can wait until the pain has become greater. Something that I've used a few times is I've just focused in on the pain on purpose. When I quit cigarettes, I hated the smell of my mum's wet ashtrays. And so I researched cancer. Yeah. And I looked at lungs and I looked at, you know, people put on the cigarette packet. I went out and I researched because I wanted to quit cigarettes. Yeah. And I started to think about, because I read in the subconscious mind, you know, basically, you know, is attracted to, what was it? Basically heard if you attach, if you want to break a habit, attach something negative to that thing. So I attached all of these images, researching cancer. I've started to journal on all the impacts it would have if I didn't quit. And I quit cigarettes. I mean, I've probably smoked a couple since then when I was in Colombia overseas 10 years ago or whatever. But other than that, like, it works. So, but yeah, if your exterior isn't working, then the point that you were making here underneath all of this is that, how do I know if I've got some trauma or if I've got some programs that aren't supporting? Well, what's the mirror looking like in your life? What are your health? What's your wealth? What's your relationships looking like? If it's not where it wants to be, then hey, you're human and you've got some programs to do. So it's up to you. Do you want to wait 10 years, 15, 20 years until everything falls apart? Or do you you want to start to work on it today, I think another way that we can do this, obviously there's pain, motivated by pain and desire. Pain is 9 times more motivating than pleasure, which is why we typically wait until everything's falling apart. But in the same token, you can focus on something this is why I think for business owners it's really great, because business, people usually have a huge desire to create something, and it's in that desire to create that thing that we have to level up our character. We have to. I had no choice but to heal my trauma because my business and my financial situation was reflecting that. When you've got a safe job, if you're safe, there's no pain, or at least not enough pain. You probably hate your job. But business is another fantastic way of kind of, if you want to be successful in business, you're going to have to work through your shit. So leading off this, as I was going through your Instagram, kind of prepping for the podcast, I noticed you kept speaking about this emotional home, and you brought it up before. So just quickly walk me through again. The emotional home is the most common emotions that you felt growing up that you have still, whether the circumstances have changed in which have triggered the feeling, but that these are the most common feelings that you have. I think Joe Dispenza talks about this a lot, about, things that fire together, wire together, and those neural circuits, those neural circuits that have been firing and connecting over and over and over in childhood have become so strong that those are the ones that are most prominent and active as an adult. And so what we're saying here is you probably don't realize this is going on, but it is. Okay, so that's what an emotional home is?
Yes,
yep.
Yeah.
And so how do we shift this?
Yeah, so first of all, you've got to understand what you're actually feeling.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people, when I ask people, how do you want to feel? They often say, well, I just don't want to feel this.
Yeah, they say what they don't want to feel.
And so many people are in their head, not in their heart. And this, a lot of women especially, right? Yep. Now, unless you can, and what that looks like is, say for instance, someone's experiencing pain in their relationship. Well, when I might ask somebody, okay, well, how are you feeling in your relationship? Most people go, well, I just think that person shouldn't be da-da-da-da-da.
They tell you a story or a complaint or something.
They go straight into their head.
Yep.
They can't sit there and actually say, I feel really isolated. I feel lonely. I feel sad. I feel fear. I feel inadequate. They can't actually articulate it. So the first step is emotional attunement.
Yep.
And I teach this. I have a 6-week online course that teaches you how to move through all of this for yourself. So emotionally attuning to yours and your partner's emotions, okay? Yep. And so it's just noticing, okay, wow, I am often noticing I'm feeling quite inadequate. Yeah. And my thoughts reflect that, because when something might happen with my partner, like say, for instance, there's a misunderstanding or some sort of conflict. I always
end up feeling like this.
The way where you go from that, whether you go into love or fear. Yeah. So say, for instance, let's play this out, right? Say, for instance, you might have an argument with your wife.
Yep.
What is your immediate assumption after that argument? Do you go into fear or do you go into love? So it's like you have an argument, and say she goes to the shops and you're noticing yourself thinking about it. If you were a secure person who had a good emotional home, you would sort of immediately go to, okay, I can see she's feeling this. I can see I'm feeling that. There's some confusion. There's some misunderstanding here. I really want to create space to understand her more deeply. I'm going to express what I need, and then we're going to figure this out.
Yeah.
But if you were to go into fear, that might be she's this and she's that and how dare she and da-da-da-da. And that's where the narrative is more sort of like negative, and it's more harmful, and it brings you more into separation rather than closeness. Yeah. Because every conflict is an opportunity for deeper connection, right?
Yes.
Because what you make things mean are different to what she makes things mean. I see this all the time, right? So what it is, it's about understanding, and I see this a lot with finances, right? Women tend to crave more safety. So men tend to crave more freedom. Yes. So the way that we spend money may reflect that. Yeah. And so when we understand, when you go and spend all this money.
The guy goes and buys a $50,000 boat, and she's like, I just want to get my savings up.
It could, it's whatever dynamic's playing out, right? So when you can actually deep down understand, and you're wanting to get closer to that, then it shows you probably had a pretty decent emotional home. Whereas when you go into something that separates you and something that puts you more into a victim mindset, it tells me you probably have had an emotional home around fear, sadness, or anger. Yeah. So that's the first step, right? Understanding where do you go in conflict and in any sort of stuck, like when you're trapped in, like when you're not feeling good in life, it's do you go into resourcefulness or unresourcefulness?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm relating to everything you're saying. Within myself, what I notice is that my default, depending on how grounded I am and depending on how well that I'm looking after my own
Of course.
health. But if I'm tired, if I'm exhausted, I've got a higher chance of going into initially a default mode of being angry.
Yeah.
And it usually when I, because I've done a lot of this work, under that would be like a feeling of being taken advantage of or something of that nature. But then I would usually, ideally, not every single time, not perfect, but I would catch myself and I would consciously walk myself through a series of steps where I go, hold on a second.
Yeah, great.
Why is she reacting right now? Clearly, I'm having a visual experience. I'm reacting. She's reacting. And the one thing what helps me is I try to picture the little girl inside her. And I ask myself this question, like, what is the little girl feeling? So that I take away from the wife at the moment, I think she's nuts, she's crazy, she's this, she's that. And which is what you were saying before, we've all felt like that, right? But underneath, as soon as I can visualize or at least feel into that little girl, usually that little girl's feeling unsafe in some way.
100%.
So I'm not going to, in that moment, as the adult me, maybe sometimes can't always hold space for the woman, but I can pretty much always hold space for the girl as long as I can remember it. It's just a simple thing. And my wife actually taught me this.
Yeah.
But it has been very, very helpful for me when I have had these emotions where it does feel visceral for me, where I am actually really upset because that's triggered the wound in me.
Of course.
But yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be watching this and going, wow, you know, it's like
Well, this is the thing, right? This is why I'm so passionate about this work. Like, you know, it's so funny. I had a bit of a conflict with a friend recently and I'm actually good friends. They're a husband and wife team and I do a bit of work with them. And, you know, I had a bit of a misunderstanding with her and he and I have quite a deep relationship, right? And he really knows we have a lot of these deep conversations and he knows my emotional home is around rejection. And it was so beautiful because she could not understand why I was reacting the way that I was. Yeah. And even I couldn't. Even I was like, wow, there's a great quote. If it's hysterical, it's historical. I could see myself in a moment like reacting in a way that was not appropriate to the...
Yeah, it's an overreaction. So, you know, there's some sort of wound is you're not just you're not living the current event, you're reliving every other time that somebody else made you feel like that in the past.
That's right. And so what was so beautiful is he went home to, like we had these conversations and he said to her when they were talking about it and she was sort of like, I don't understand why she's so upset. And he was able to say to her, well, remember for Nez, rejection is really painful for her. So this is bringing up that rejection wound. And it's like when we can understand your childhood and what were the experiences that were quite wounding to you, talk me through those moments where you felt abandoned, where you felt let down, where you felt unsupported, where you felt unloved, unworthy, unknown. And then when we're playing out life and I unknowingly press on that wound, I can go into more compassion and more empathy for that and I can hold space for that and vice versa. And most people never do this work. Most people get married and never have these conversations, but you've lived an entire life before this person's come into your life. You could sit and talk for the rest of your lives and share and do nothing else but share your experiences and you still would never fully understand each other. You would still never fully know that person. And so the deepest work we can ever do, first of all, is on ourselves. You know, for me, it's like, of course it makes so much sense that when someone looks at me a certain way, it can bring up so much shame and fear in me because that reminds me of my father. Yeah.
And even though that as an adult, consciously, you can understand that your father didn't mean it in a certain way, subconsciously, that emotion as a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old, when the person who you want their approval, love the most, that feels like a dagger to the heart. And that's why we the nervous system holds on to that so much because it's like survival. If this person doesn't love me, if this person's going to leave me, if this person doesn't think that I'm a good girl or a good boy, maybe I'm going to get kicked out of the tribe.
It means death.
And it means ultimately it always ends up as being death.
Well, we're always searching for two things in childhood, safety and love.
Yeah.
We know that we need those two things to survive. And if anything is threatened, if anything threatens that safety or love, we will shape shift, do whatever we have to accommodate, to adapt, to survive. And what that looks like for you, it's everyone's different, right? Some people it's people pleasing, some it's achieving, some it's staying small, some it's acts of service.
Tick and tick.
Some it's making people laugh. Yeah. Most of the most funny and humorous people that you see, learnt to cope that way through because their childhood was – they survived in childhood when they made people laugh. It meant home was safe.
Once you start to see this within your stealth, my mouth today. Once you start to see this within yourself, my experience has been that you get really good at noticing in others.
Oh yeah.
And then it helps you not take things so, because I was very sensitive growing up.
Me too.
And so I would get so offended by anything anyone ever said. And as I've, been doing this work for a long time now though, but like I can spot people can see I've still got shadows, but we all do, right? But it's so interesting to see these things. And then, majority of things you just like, whether it's somebody who's giving you hate online or even someone who's using one of their coping strategies like laughter or this or that, and it's like totally like not necessary in that given situation. You just like, you can just have compassion instead of getting irritated or frustrated or judging them. You can say, I can see why they're doing that thing, why they're always, doing this or that.
Yeah.
But yeah, wow. So, okay. So your journey was going through your, kind of, ego death, or at least your catalyst moment was all of that pain, right? You've gone on this journey now to becoming a coach. You're online. This is what you do. Walk me through in a little bit more detail. You said you had like a 6-week program. Obviously, the summary of what you're sharing is this is really about raising your emotional intelligence, isn't it? Your emotional IQ, as somebody calls it. So if you're having those reflections as to use the same kind of narrative we've been saying about the external life representing probably much your emotional intelligence score in a sense, if we wanted to do something like that, right? So the program's about, growing your emotional intelligence. Obviously, there's many ways that we can do this, but we can go into that a little bit more. What I feel really guided to ask you about is we spoke before off camera again about like men and women. What are the most common things that you see as from the work that because you work with both men and women, right?
I work with some men individually,
mostly women,
but I mostly work with women.
So, for instance, so that we could, obviously we've shared a lot of the knowledge stuff, but if we could go into some of the, I guess, most common scenarios that you would see play out with, maybe we'll start with women. So, again, the men could really see that and go, oh, maybe next time my wife is playing this out, we can actually gift them the ability to raise their emotional intelligence right here, right now on this podcast through sharing that landscape with them. So when their wife's acting like this, what it means is actually underneath, she's probably feeling one of these particular things, a bit like that branch tree we spoke about. Do you want to give us a couple of examples of women that you work with, the most common scenarios? I think one you shared before was like maybe being controlling. Let's maybe start with that one. When a wife is... would you put controlling and like nagging and nitpicking, critical? Would you put those in the same kind of category?
Yeah.
That's the same thing. Okay, walk me through that one. That's a common one for a lot of...
Yeah, I don't know about you if you hear that a lot from the men that you work with, but from me, I see this is definitely what I see a lot. Yeah. And so I'll give you a perfect example of how this plays out. When we it's called protest behavior, right? When we go to our partner and we're protesting about something, it's usually there's something underneath that we're not able to articulate. So it's never really about the thing.
Yes.
So say, for instance, you come home, you're on your phone and is it Alice?
Ellis
Ellis comes in And if she's in a bit of a story, right?
Yep.
And say, for instance,
He's on his phone again. He's always on his phone, something like that.
That's right. Now, if she comes to you and she points the finger at you and projects, you're always on your phone. You don't love me. You're not really in this marriage. You don't show up, blah, blah, blah. You're instantly going to go into what? Defensiveness, right?
Reactive,
Because she's in her mind, you have to go into your mind. So when you're in your mind, you can't be in your heart.
Yeah.
Whereas if she had enough emotional intelligence to pause and to notice, wow, I'm really noticing, I'm focusing a lot on how much he's on his phone. What am I actually feeling right now? I'm feeling lonely. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling disconnected. I'm feeling a bit of neglect, and I'm feeling distant. All right, now I'm going to process that. So I'm in my heart. I can come to you and I can say, hey, darling, I can see you're on your phone. I'm noticing I'm feeling really, really distant and disconnected from you. When you've got time, I would really like to connect with you because I'm feeling, I'd love to spend some time together. Is that going to be more inviting for you rather than her coming in and pointing the finger?
Yeah, and even it's funny because I'm smiling and I even felt like this just this lightness, even as you kind of, because I was involved in it, I'm almost like we're role playing a little bit here.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be completely different.
And so exactly, right? So now in any dynamic where there's conflict in a couple, one person has to move into the wise adult, okay?
Yeah.
Because again, you're both in your
one
inner
person
child.
has to become conscious.
Now, the only thing to change is self, right? Everyone points the finger and wants the other person to change. I hear women all the time complain like, my partner doesn't open up to me. He won't communicate with me. And I say to them,
what have you been doing?
Have you ever considered that maybe you're not a safe place for him to open up? Have you ever asked yourself, what do I need to learn about nonviolent communication in order for me to create more safety in this connection?
Yeah.
No one wants to point. No, it's so difficult to look at yourself and go, how can I change this? The only thing to change is myself. I can't constantly be pointing at them. So this is why this emotional intelligence is so important, because when you are doing the work on yourself, you can change any dynamic, you can change any relationship like that. And so for men, it's about when you're noticing your partner come to you in her, big storm of emotions, you can actually drop into, okay, what is she actually feeling right now?
Yes.
If I can move out of defensiveness and stonewalling and contempt, how might I still stay open and let her hold space for that? But also it's up to her to be able to come forward in that first owning her own emotions too. So do you know what I mean? The more that we teach everybody how to do this work, whether you're a man or a woman, the more that we're all able to hold space for that within ourselves and each other. Yeah. So the biggest thing I see is people are never really complaining about the thing that they think that they're complaining about. It's always
they're complaining about how they feel.
It's a project, but they're not owning how they feel.
Yes.
So the minute you're going into the analysis, the judgment.
If they did this, and this, then I'd be able to feel why, but they're not aware of the fact that they want to feel why in the first place. And so that's the key thing. You use the word attunement,
and they're not even actually able to even first acknowledge, I'm noticing I'm feeling a lot of this right now. And that's the first step, right? You can't. The 5 pillars to this emotional intelligence work. The first one is emotional attunement.
Yes.
Then there's emotional regulation.
Yes.
Then there's emotional safety, emotional connection, emotional agility. So agility is the ability to move up and out of it and move on with your life.
Not to hold on for the rest of the day and be passive aggressive or.
That's right. I just hosted a retreat a few weeks ago where we did an anger release, and it was so challenging for these women to move through it because they were like, no, I don't have anger. I don't have any anger. And I was like, I said, okay, when was the last time you rolled your eyes? When was the last time you huffed and puffed? When was the last time you slammed a door? When was the last time you got up and you moved your body in a way where you were like fed up, frustrated?
Yes.
They are all unhealthy, leaky ways that you let out your anger because you are not owning that you're deep down angry. So you can repress an emotion all you want, but it's like a beach ball trying to be forced underneath the water. Eventually, it comes out in leaky ways.
I think 110%, and I think anger's one of those ones that if you said the magical word earlier, shame. As young kids, we were all shamed for the emotion of anger. Every emotion has a valid reason and shouldn't be shamed and shouldn't be projected.
Yeah.
Definitely shouldn't be projected,
exactly.
but should be, if in your 5 core pillars there, should be regulated. But our parents, like you said, they didn't have the knowledge that presidents have back then. They didn't. They couldn't drop down into one knee and say, "Hey, I can see that right now you're feeling this," and communicate in healthy ways that, you know, we are now learning these haven't studied nonviolent communication. I keep hearing it. It's the third time I've heard it now.
You
so
should
I
read his
should
book. It's amazing.
But I have heard of it, and I do value very highly communication. And would say that I'm a pretty decent communicator when I'm grounded. Okay, so you've got these 5 pillars. So what we're imagining, you laid out scenario 1 of the triggered version. Scenario 2, if I lay it back to you to paint that picture, would be that if we're using Ellis as an example, Ellis walks through the door. She sees me on my phone. It's the 5th time she's seen me that day or that week or whatever it might be. Because she's done the work, she understands these 5 pillars. She comes in, she goes to want to say something, she witnesses that emotion stirring up inside her, that overreaction to just me sitting with my daughter potentially on the phone, and instead pauses. I don't even see her, and she goes through that process. After which she comes, taps me on the shoulder, and then discusses what you just shared. And I go, because I'm conscious, I go, wow, she would normally say X, Y, and Z. And this time I'm having a disconfirming experience because
love that.
Because I'm witnessing in this moment that she didn't act how she normally acts. Suddenly what that opens up is for that connection. And I'm speaking this from experience. Not this exact scenario, but that scenario of
having
my wife and I having conversations saying, hey, exactly like you shared, and both of us working on certain maybe less healthy habits.
Well, you're healing each other.
And then having those disconfirming experiences, going, oh, wow, she would normally nitpick over this thing. She didn't. And in that witnessing, what that creates for me, which is I think you kind of shared anyway before, is that every single time, you can imagine every single time somebody pokes at you and niggles at you, it's almost like you pushing that person a meter away from comfort and safety and intimacy. In the same way, what I have found from my experience is that every time she creates a disconfirming experience where I think she's going to act in one way and then she doesn't, that's almost like an invitation where I feel safe, not consciously, but as I witness as a conscious man, to step forwards back into that space, back into the space of feeling safe, and obviously that's safe.
Deeper connection,
and again,
that's
deeper
where
connection.
intimacy is formed. Because intimacy is into me, you see, and so that's actually when I'm vulnerable.
You're dropping lots of little quote bombs. I love that. We're going to need to write all these down underneath the Spotify or whatever for people to. Well,
that's the funny thing, right? Everyone
into
craves
me, you see.
Into me, you see. Everyone craves intimacy. We want to be fully known and seen and loved, and yet we deeply fear it at the same time. Why? Because we deeply fear that maybe we're not worthy of love. So what that looks like is or we feel, I just want to add one more thing, or we fear that they'll see something inside of us that isn't lovable.
That isn't lovable, that we have had shamed, and now we are shaming, going, I don't want this person to see this part of me, because if they did, they'd think I was a monster, or they'd think that I'm X, Y, Z. So I'm going to hide that from them and and keep them at arm's length. And they'll find out that maybe there is something wrong with me.
That's right. That's exactly what we all fear. And so that's why it's so challenging for us to come forward and to share these little parts of ourselves.
Especially if somebody's been doing this at us.
That's why it's so challenging for us to do that. It's so challenging for us to take ownership and actually share, like, hey, I'm noticing I'm telling myself this story. I'm noticing I'm feeling all these emotions, because that is taking radical responsibility, but it's also inviting someone to see that you are vulnerable and that you have some parts that aren't the confident persona that you project out into the world day to day. And that's scary.
So everything just really comes back to that, and starting off with awareness, doesn't it? Awareness is so important.
It is. And I just want to add to this. The reason why we deeply fear doing that with a partner right now is usually because we did that with a parent as a child, and there was pain there. And so we've learned,
we've associated,
this part of me isn't lovable, this part of me is bad, I need to push that down. So it's just,
because if they saw that, like my parents saw it, I might be rejected.
That's right.
And it ends up, I'll kicked out the tribe and I die.
That's right. So it's just worth knowing this is hard.
Yeah.
And it's also the very thing that brings us the thing that we want. Us learning how to express how we feel, what we need with vulnerability and total ownership. And that is the thing that's going to invite deeper connection for your relationships and to help you become connected parents to your children as well.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of that quote, the treasure you seek is in the cave that you're not willing to enter, or something like that.
The cave you fear to seek holds the treasure you seek. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Totally. It's not
true.
comfortable doing this work, and yeah, maybe you do have to hit rock bottom, or hit a bottom or hit a pain point in order to be willing to do it. But it's completely transformed my life. And I had horrible relationships, even up until probably 5 years ago with friendships. So I was always focused on another project, be it triathlon, be it DJing, be it any 1,000 of the entrepreneurial endeavors that I tried to spark up. I just conveniently never had time to be close with people.
Because you're avoiding pain.
Well, I was avoiding the pain that I received in the friendships growing up. And I only really realized that literally like a few years ago, as I did, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as I did to create some more financial security, which was a big thing for me. Then I was, kind of ascending up that scale and going, okay, I think the next one's like connection or community or something like that. And yeah, I had that aha moment of awareness, like, wow, when I come out, I pop my head out of these businesses that I've these projects that I've been focused on, I feel really lonely. I feel really like nobody likes me. I feel all of these different ways. And initially I identified with that and thought, but after, again, growing my emotional intelligence, I was able to really say, hold on a second, let me take responsibility. What have you invested, Scott?
Yeah.
Have you invested in these friendships? No, you fucking haven't, have you? So then how could you expect yourself to feel like you do have connection? You just pop your head up and go partying every now and again when you just want to take a breath of fresh air, or when you want to get away from the thing that you in business that's making you feel uncomfortable. Yeah. So it was like a scale of which thing makes you feel less uncomfortable. It was never about feeling good or being successful. I was literally living out that I just don't want that, and I just don't want that. So emotional intelligence. I got you to share one scenario of the female one, and I think like that's probably paints the picture enough. We don't need to go into multiple for women. I think most people, both men and women who watch that, the women will be catching themselves and going, "Fuck, I'm manifesting." And the mirror of my relationship right now is I can take some responsibility for that. In saying that, men have things that they can do as well. Number one is when they witness the woman going through one of those things, not go, she's crazy, she's nuts, and go through their own reaction series. But what are some things, I know it's not your key core avatar that you work with, but from your experience, either in your own life or with friends or with clients, is there a scenario similar to that is common for men that they play out? That we could create, again, an ability to raise their emotional intelligence and consciousness by sharing that breakdown for them.
Yeah. So, look, the biggest thing I see with the men that I work with is desire to stray from the relationship that they're in.
Sexually?
Yep, to be unfaithful, whether it be emotionally, sexually, like it's naturally
they're looking for a bit more connection and intimacy.
But the very thing that they're doing, like what they're actually doing is it's a mother wound, right? So men will either fall into one of two categories in this scenario, right? They either deeply fear these uncomfortable conversations and doing the work with their current partner. Yes. So in order to relieve that feeling of inadequacy, disconnection from themselves, confusion, shame, they seek to feel better through another woman, right? So they seek
to almost auto-destruct it, so they don't.
That's right.
So they can use the excuse of, well, it fell apart, and I don't have to do that work anymore.
That's right. So they can seek, female like that validation and that sort of like feeling of wanting to be desired.
Yes.
And desire is actually a really low emotion. Like seeking that feeling of desire is actually it's quite close to shame.
Yes.
When we're constantly looking for someone to desire us, it's usually because we feel a huge sense of inadequacy and unworthiness. So I see a lot of men not doing the work to emotionally tune to themselves to understand what's going on, but actually playing out behavior that relieves those emotions in a very unresourceful way, because then it impacts their relationships, their marriages, their families break down. So that's a common thing. Or they go into unresourceful behavior because they cannot, the fear of upsetting their wife with having to stand up and have difficult conversations is
and
so
ask for needs that they feel uncomfortable asking for, either because it doesn't feel masculine or makes them feel needy or whatever is the, be that, I mean, sexually or anything else. Even, the saying happy wife, happy life, I think unfortunately that's to me is like probably one of the most unhealthy things you could say.
And women actually don't want that. I would argue we're in a society now where women have been pushed to act more like men and men have been pushed to be more like women.
Yes.
And this is where so many of our relationships are falling apart. Women deeply desire a man who is in his healthy masculine, who is leading, providing, protecting, and leading the family both financially, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Yes.
They deeply want that, right? And I'll tell you what most women don't want to admit to that because of this feminist movement.
Of course, yeah.
But I'll tell you what, all of the women that I see that are miserable in their relationships, deep down, if you saw a character on TV or they see a celebrity or something that is playing out that same archetype, they find that guy deeply desirable. Okay?
And that's the tough thing, because society's telling men, right, to toxic masculinity, all of these things, but then there's this. So the men are going, well, I'm feeling like I can't be the type of man that I actually, I will say desire, but that feel most authentic wanting to be. And I feel like that's being told that it's toxic. And I think that my wife wants a nice guy, wants a nice husband. I can tell you when I haven't been really stepping into my like warrior archetype, and I've been a little bit more, I've been a great father, I've been a gorgeous husband, but maybe in the business I've been more passive because there's been reasons and things like that. But whatever the reason is, she didn't give a fuck, not consciously, but I can instantly watch the level of attraction, the level of polarity, intimacy-wise, sex-wise. Of course she still loves me, but but I can sense that. I can feel that when I'm not really taking the lead on things is probably the best way to articulate it. She still loves me. And I think a lot of relationships are playing out that there is love there. But the men are not feeling validated or acknowledged because they really would like to have either more sex or more, or not just or either the frequency or the level of intensity or passion or something of that nature. But she doesn't have that attraction because he's just
passive.
He's not being, a little bit.
And this is the thing, right? If you didn't learn as a child...
Because it's shamed. He's being shamed. He's not allowed to be there. He's afraid to be the thing that both people need in the relationship.
But this is exactly where it comes back to our emotional intelligence, right? If his anger and his, and if his if his anger and his frustration as a child was shamed and suppressed, and love was taken away, what do you think he'll play out in his relationship when he goes to want to express a boundary or want to step up? He will be fearful that this love will be taken away, so he will suppress that. But the more he does that, the more that
it's a survival technique rather than a thrival technique.
That's right. The more that she starts to nitpick and she's not understanding, and it's just this cycle, right? So deep down, what she's wanting is more leadership and for him to take charge. But actually, she's also causing the very thing. And I see this a lot with women too. I just want to put some responsibility on women. I coach a lot of women who's and any guy that I often have couples that come to work with me. And I'll straight away say to their husband, you need to go and work with someone else. I'll work with a woman. And then I see that man starting to show up in the relationship and wanting to take charge and wanting to do. And she'll be like, no, not quite like that. No, not right now. This isn't the right timing.
Interfering.
You cannot complain about your husband not stepping up. And then when he does step up, tell him it's in the wrong way. That is the biggest thing that women do to kill their polarity.
Men want acknowledgement, right? And that's the opposite.
Men want these four things. They want admiration, respect, appreciation, and loyalty. Boom. Women want love, connection, and safety. It's not to say women don't want respect too. It's not to say men don't want love too.
Of course.
But I sit here and I listen to women, and every single complaint is always a deep fear that he doesn't love me. And with men, it's always a deep fear that she doesn't respect me. It's always like if you asked any man, what do you deeply want to hear from your woman? It's I want to hear, I respect you and I will follow you.
How can you feel respected if when you go to do something, you're trying to step up, she's critiquing what you're doing? What that's underneath, what a man would make that mean is that she doesn't think I've got this. She doesn't think that I can do this myself. She thinks I'm weak. She thinks I'm hopeless. She doesn't think I'm capable. Well, then if that's the image of how she sees me, then she mustn't respect me. She mustn't desire me. And these.
But again, you're in that you're in that dynamic because that has felt natural to you. So that's your
because
work.
Of childhood.
That's right. You've grown up feeling inadequate, feeling unworthy. So you've attracted a woman who sees that triggers that in you.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't have that wound, you would actually look at that woman and you'd notice the behavior. You would step up and you'd set a boundary and you would say, hey, I'm noticing I'm trying to lead our family. I'm trying to do this, this, and this.
Yes.
You're not on board. There can't be two men in this relationship.
Yes.
This is the kind of man I want to be. If you don't want that in a partner, that's fine. But this is where it ends. Yeah. A strong, healthy masculine.
I literally have had that conversation.
Yeah, a healthy
in the
masculine,
earlier days with Ellis.
Yeah, a healthy masculine will do that. He will not tolerate that, right?
Yeah.
But if you are tolerating that,
he's not trying to please.
It's because you deep down, your worthiness lines up with the way she sees you,
and you see that as normal behaviour. On some level.
Well, you're projecting again. You're looking at her and thinking, why are you treating me this way when you're not actually stopping to ask yourself, why do I accept this treatment? So but it's funny, right? It's like the egg before the chicken. It's like the two go together so well.
Yes,
and
yes.
And so someone has to be the one to recognize the pattern and call it out.
Yeah.
And then they both need to do the work to heal. And again, you can't force anyone else.
Yeah.
You have to take responsibility for your side of the street. And then what I say to all of my clients is you have to trust that when you do the work, they will it's a dance, right? And if you're doing a different dance, they have to change the way that they dance to respond. And either that relationship will start to become more healthy and then therefore you can keep your family together, or she will not heal with you. She might fall away, but you will go on to find a healthy feminine.
Yeah. I love that. I wanted to just add one more thing as a kind of not segue, but just as an add-on. If there's people who are, which I'm sure that there will be a lot of people because this is a very common issue in relationships, even for conscious relationships. Imagine somebody right now who's watching this or listening on Spotify, iTunes, whatever. They're going through this right now and they're actually doing the work. They've watched previous podcasts, they've done a course, I don't know, whatever, they've read books, whatever they've done, but they're on one individual, be it man or woman, is on that journey. They're doing that work and they're having these conversations with their partner. Like, do you think that, I mean, you kind of answered a little bit, but do you think that there is anything that this person can do, or do you really think that you just have to choose within yourself how long you're willing to wait around? Do you know what I'm kind of trying to say here? How long is the right time? I think it's different for everyone. I think you have to have that own. For me, as I'm kind of listening to myself say this, I'm feeling like the answer is you have to have your own relationship with your intuition and ask. Because sometimes I think people should push on and it could be the right person if they just hold space for long enough that little girl might feel safe enough through the disconfirmed experience that you haven't waited a month and then started to attack her again. But at the same token, there are many relationships and people are going to maybe hate me for this, but they just shouldn't fucking be together. People got together in trauma bonding and whatever else, like a quote that, or not a quote, but something that I said about my ex-partner was that we were meant to be together, we just weren't meant to stay together.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you're right. It really depends on the scenario. I think if you have children, you have a responsibility to, again, I will say this. I will say if you have children and they're witnessing you in
Depends on how toxic the relationship is.
If you're noticing you've got terrible conflict and they're witnessing a lot of like intimidating and violent.
Yeah. You're creating an environment through your relationship that is extremely unhealthy and unsafe for those kids.
I first of all, that needs to stop because even if you don't think it's unsafe, children pick up on like
even
feeling,
just energetically.
That's right.
Even
chaos.
if you're not doing it.
They pick up on little ways and that you'll notice it in their behavior, right? How they try to mitigate and how they try to create safety in the home by making you laugh, doing this, doing that. So if you've got children, I think you've got a commitment to try and do a bit more work before leaving the relationship.
Yep.
If you're new in a dynamic, I think it's really up to you, right? Because the biggest work that we ever do is in relationship, but yet I do say to a lot of my clients, have a time frame in your mind.
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, I'm going to give this, I've already been in this relationship 6 years. What's another 6 months? In my own mind, I'm not going to say that to this person.
I'm giving you 6 months.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm actually going to sit in this for 6 months. I'm going to commit to myself doing the work.
Yes.
Because isn't it funny, right? You said yourself about a scenario with Ellis where she was sort of taking responsibility. Accountability begets accountability.
Yes.
So the more accountability you take and the more you see yourself and how you're showing up with radical responsibility, the more likely your partner is too.
Usually, like if I think that's an innate thing for most people, not every single time, but if you see someone making an effort, a lot of times I won't speak for everyone, but what I've seen is a lot of people, they get so tired because they already think that they've been making effort and their wife or their husband hasn't. So then they just, it's almost like, well, I tried that before.
Oh, well, I'll say this, right? Making an effort doesn't mean trying to keep your partner happy.
Yes, exactly.
That's not like, I think that's where people go wrong. Like a lot of men.
That's just kind of simping in a sense.
That's right. A lot of men are like, I do everything. Why isn't she happy? She's not happy because she doesn't feel connected to you. You don't have an emotional connection and you're not understanding what's going on.
Or you're not embodying an archetype that you know, the book that I'm reading at the moment, which I think is another secondary kind of top 3 books as well as The Way of Superior Man, is the King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Yeah, I saw that. Wow.
I mean, you've got to be ready for that because it can feel quite exposing.
Yes.
But in the same time, brings so much emotional intelligence and awareness and healing. But I think like it's just one of those things where in those situations, if you can't really see what's going on, it's extremely hard to kind of act differently. So, yeah, I kind of forgot where I was going on that point.
Yeah,
but
well, I think the hardest thing is to look at yourself, right? Because that's what consciousness is. Like it's hard to see yourself because look at me. I'm sitting here looking at you. Yeah. You're looking at me. I can't see me. Yeah. Therefore, I can't really – it's really hard to actually know and understand you. What I will say is this. The best thing anyone could do, any man or woman wanting to heal, is get into a community, into group. I honestly believe group healing, community healing will be the way of the future because what's really interesting, and I see this all the time, when I ran this retreat – everyone came in, no, I had a great childhood. I don't really have any issues. I'm just here for a bit of this and that. And I'll tell you, most people suffer from one of 3 wounds. The first one is, the most common is the unworthy wound. Yeah. After that, there's the unknown wound. And after that, there's the unloved wound, right? Now, in this scenario, with 30 women present, chances are there's going to be a third of them or maybe more with the unworthy and then a third of them with the unknown and a third in the unloved.
That's that key core.
In the key core wounds.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm sitting here and someone else is sharing and talking and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, that really sounds a lot like how I feel. That's a lot like my experience. Yeah. All of a sudden I get that opportunity to witness myself through a mirror, through you. And that's why this work is so good. So the first thing I'll say to people is men, get into a men's group, women get into a women's circle or get into a community with other men and women who are doing this work because that will expand you so much quicker than
rather than just working. I think there's benefits to both, but I agree with the community stuff as well, because for that exact reason, sometimes we're not willing to. If it can be quite confronting for people to lock eye and eye with either a psychologist, a therapist, a life coach, whoever, emotion intelligence coach, whoever it is, and just start to share their deepest vulnerabilities. But like you said, if you witness someone else doing it, number one, it gives you permission to feel. To not judge yourself as much when you go, you have that aha moment. You mentioned Tony Robbins before, right? The first thing that I ever invested like a decent amount of money in, I went to UPW. In Sydney, walked on 10,000 degree hot coals, danced, did all the stuff that I thought was goofy before I went, but did it. But the moment that really stands out was like I had felt like I wasn't enough my entire life, right? I used my looks, I used my accolades as ways to prop up my self-worth. Yeah. And it was obviously shallow underneath. Yeah. I was petrified that people would find out who I was underneath because it felt so breakable because of all the things that happened in the past. But the moment that he said, all right, 6,000 people at UPW, put your hand up if you feel like you're not good enough. 5,997 people put their hand up. And in that moment, exactly to your point, I was like, fuck me. I thought and with such a surety. And that's where I think a lot of people, just because you're having a feeling, they really identify and go, this is real, right? My realness, my truth, which actually wasn't true because my emotional intelligence wasn't there yet at that point. I wasn't able to discern or to be aware or to be attuned. It was that I was the only person on the freaking planet who felt like this, and it was my parents' fault and my friend's fault. And in that moment, it was like, wow. Number one, I have permission that it's safe, that I can feel this. Number two, it just directed me to the fact that this is something that I feel I can get out of my head of the stories and the narratives and all those things. And I can go within and go, yeah, wow, I felt like this my entire life. And in those moments unraveling after that, it was like the first kind of, maybe not the first, but definitely a monumental piece of me kind of unraveling, wow. Like we were saying at the start of the podcast, those aha moments of, wow, this need for significance. Yeah, I think he has the 6 core needs.
Yeah.
Wow, that plays out in me always trying to use accolades as X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Or my need for this plays out in those types of ways.
Yeah.
But the community piece, I think, is really huge, and we're seeing the rise now. I mean, the women's communities have been around for quite a while because obviously they had their up until the last 5 years, you know, obviously now they're the front and center of every movie. They're, you know, that's the whole movement there, and it's men is the opposite one right now. So there's already been a lot of these women's rights and women's communities that have built up, but now we are just starting. I've got a guest that's going to be coming on, Jacob O'Neill. I'm not sure if you know him.
I do know him. Yep.
He's got.
I don't know him personally, but I know of him.
He's got a business called The Gathering of Men, and it looks fucking
it does
awesome.
look amazing.
I want to do it myself, right? Really accessing these different archetypes. But we're starting to see overseas in America, there's tons of them. In Australia, not as many, but starting to see a rise of these communities. So if people are watching right now, you know, give it a shot, take the leap. It's scary when if you've never invested in something, to do it. But I mean, if I look at my life or you look at your life since you started doing this work, how have things changed, right? You're able to move through those things. It means you're able to maybe hold down healthier partnerships, able to, for me, means I'm able to have a wife, have a kid, have a business, as I shared with you, instead of just needing to have the accolades, which my ego needed before. I can step aside and really champion my wife and play my roles, also very important, but not being the face of the brand. Yeah. Which 5 years ago, I don't think I would have been able to. I would want to consciously do that because it would have been part of being the nice guy. But unconsciously, I don't think I would have been able to actually embody that. So, wow, we've gone through some really amazing stuff. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to see, going back into those final kind of not necessarily masculine and feminine, but male and female scenarios. We've played out a few of those. If there was anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners, anything that you think that we haven't covered that feels important to you, I just want to give you the mic to just kind of share whatever feels like it's on your heart. If there's anything like a message or just something that intuitively just feels like that you feel passionate to share.
I think that the biggest thing I wish more people understood was how important this emotional intelligence work is, not just for your relationship, but every part of your life. Because you think about it, right? In the workplace, you're dealing with people. In your friendships, you're dealing with people. Your parents, your children, life is around our experience with other people. Like the quality of our life is really in direct proportion to the quality of our relationships. And we're all going through, I really believe that most people have genuine intentions. And I do believe two things can be true, right? We can be hurt by someone and we can be upset and we can feel pain from someone's actions. And they can never, ever have intended that pain for us.
I think that's true.
And so the more that we do this work, the more that we can really deeply understand ourselves and other people, and we can move through life with more ease and more love and connection and joy and understanding. And I think that if you're noticing you are taking things personally, you are making things mean something about you, that's because you're stuck in your childhood immaturity. You know, in childhood, yes, life did revolve around you. That was all about getting your needs met. You were stuck in that mindset and you haven't matured because you haven't had that parent to help support you through that. And we can't raise emotionally intelligent kids if we're not emotionally intelligent ourselves.
Yeah.
But what I see a lot of parents do, which is so amazing, I'm seeing lots of parents doing this work for their children, but I see a lot of people feel more comfortable holding that space for their kids' emotions, but yet not their own or their partner.
Yeah.
So I think it's just really, really, taking the steps to understand your emotional home, understand how there are 4 ways that we emotionally invalidate each other when we don't have this intelligence. We project, we dismiss, we deflect, or we minimize.
Project, dismiss, minimize,
and deflect.
And deflect.
So, and these, like, when you start to see this, like, I have to catch myself. My biggest one is I either project or I minimize. And I see myself doing this almost daily. And I would say I have, a higher level of emotional intelligence. So this is such a normal, natural human, sort of thing that we do, coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And so when we understand our patterns and our little shadows, then we can grow through that. And my phone rings off the hook with people, either clients, friends, family, people in the community, because they know that I'm a safe person and they know that when they are going through something, they can come to me and without judgment find resolution.
Because they are either witnessing the embodiment by you just being yourself.
Totally.
They can see the emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and they feel safe. You're creating safety.
Yeah.
Most people are yearning for safety. Most people don't know how to create it.
Yeah.
Because we create
because
unsafety.
90% of people don't have this skill, so therefore it's just normalized that somebody treats you that way, that you get angry, or that there's 57 or 60-something% divorce rate. It's just like when that's the normalized thing, I think that's why communities are so great as well, because hold on a second, I thought this was normal, but I'm seeing a whole group of other people, who are doing different things. I can shift my mindset around.
Yeah. I think for me, when we create safe, like the ways that we leave people feeling unsafe and unheard, they can even be so genuine, right? Like, how many times have you gone to someone and gone to express, like a friend, and gone to just share, like, that you're struggling, and someone's jumped in and just tried to rescue you or give you advice. And how it's left you probably feeling a little bit off, because really we actually want to do the work ourselves. We just want someone to be witness to it as we do it.
Yeah, I think it can make you feel like almost like they're looking down you unconsciously.
Inadequacy.
Like, that's not their, and it goes back to exactly your point before. It's not their intention. They deeply just want to help. A perfect.
Well, this is the reason why we do this, right, is because your pain brings up my pain.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sit with that discomfort, so I'm going to do anything I can to make you feel better. Because, have you ever been around a group of women or even men maybe, and someone started to cry and someone else has been like, oh, don't cry, we'll talk about something else, we'll change the topic.
That doesn't happen in men. I've never seen that.
Yeah,
I've seen men cry, but not in that type of format.
People talk about holding space, but holding space is actually deeply being present to someone
without trying to change them
as they move through their process, without interrupting them, without diverting. Like, I even see it in body language. I can sit on with a couple and watch as she's expressing emotion, and all of a sudden he's been dead silent for 30 minutes, and all of a sudden, as soon as she starts to express sadness, he's moving around in his seat, he's grabbing a water. We don't even realize those tiny little minute ways that our body is trying to shift.
You can't even hold space.
Your body is trying to shift through the discomfort, and deep down on a very subconscious level, she's picking up on that. And you're not, it's not even conscious.
She's picking up energetically that you can't hold space. And therefore you're giving off the vibe that you're not safe.
Even avoiding eye contact. Yeah. Most people don't even have enough eye contact with their partners. Yeah. They sort of live their lives side by side.
It's transactional.
That's right.
Is a lot of relationships end up being transactional. Hey, have you got the kids? Did you get the groceries? Did you do this?
It's logistical.
I'm just telling you what I'm doing. You're telling me what you're doing. We're not actually having a conversation where we're listening. We're just talking at each other or about things that need to be done. And that's not, no wonder you're not.
And this is where, and so many people say in their relationships that they just drifted apart. No, what happened was there was no polarity. Yes. So naturally the polarity and the energy in the relationship's dying because you're not feeding it. Yeah. And so I'm so passionate about this work because it really does. Like when I say my phone rings off the hook, what I mean by that is I went from someone who was really disconnected from society, very depressed, very like I was
you shared that earlier.
Very self-focused, to someone who's learnt how to create safety, learnt how to release judgment of myself.
Yes.
Therefore, that extends outwards.
Yeah.
And so therefore my relationships are so much deeper, more expansive, more joyous, because I have done that work to create safety and acceptance within myself, which naturally extends out to others. Everything that's mirrored within is mirrored without. So yeah, I think when you do this work for yourself, not only do you start to really like who you are and feel good inside, you actually start to help other people feel that too. It creates a massive ripple effect in every part of your life that is just insane.
I would love to gift the listeners maybe something of an action point that they could take from this podcast. That would be something that would be very, obviously, definitely if you want to do emotional intelligence work, you're a woman or something like that, like reach out, get involved. But not everyone's at that point where they feel like they want to, they could afford, whatever the reason is. If we were to instead give them almost like a conduit to that further step, whether it's you or whether it's somebody else, to getting to work with somebody or joining a community, what would be an exercise if you could think of one? Like I've, for instance, done lots of shadow work over the last couple of years to really uncover a lot of stuff. What would be an exercise that someone who's watching or listening to this could press pause and actually walk through an exercise to maybe uncover something that would be of use to them in terms of, like, obviously you shared there's 5 different things and your goal is to do emotional intelligence. Is there an exercise that you can think of now that would be a simple starting point for it could be genderless, or you can do it for just a woman or just a man if you want to, whatever.
So I will say, if you go onto my Instagram, Nerida Bint, and there is a free emotional archetype quiz that you can do. Oh, did you? What were you?
I'm a projector.
Oh, me too.
I watched that and I was like, a whole bunch of synergistic things kind of happened around that.
Wow, interesting.
And it was just like the perfect timing, because I thought I will suss you out a little bit, see what you're doing and what this emotional home stuff was. And I was reading it. I think there's 4, right?
Yes, 4.
So there's 4. What are they?
Projector, deflector, minimize,
these are the
and
things you
dismiss.
said before, right?
Yeah.
So I'm reading it and I'm thinking, projector? I'm not a projector.
Very common.
And then I'm reading let me read the other 3. I read the other 3 and I'm like, oh, well, I'm 100% definitely not those. So then I read that. It was only short. It was only a short blurb. So if you want to definitely go and check that out. I was reading I read it like 3, 4, 5 times. And each time I read it, I'm thinking more and more, maybe I'm letting go of the story of maybe I'm thinking, I think I am. I think I am. Now, of course, if you had have really gone back 5 years, you would have seen 100% of this.
Of course.
I've done some work, but
that's
still,
just your default.
It's still my default when I'm not being conscious, when I'm being deeply triggered in wounds that I haven't fully healed yet.
Yes.
I'm like, wow. Yeah. And I was witnessing how even more recently that had actually played out in my relationship. I'm like, cool. So first thing I just went straight to my wife and I said, hey, I just did this thing and I realized I've done this and, you've got your things, but I just wanted to
own my side of the street.
Own my side of the street and say, look, I'm aware of this.
Oh,
not as like
that.
for any man that's watching, it's not like I hate this idea of like needing to apologize for everything, but sometimes you do need to apologize, but sometimes just owning it simply gives that sense of acknowledgement to the other person, be it man or woman, to say, oh, this person can see their patterns.
Yes.
And that actually brings a lot of safety for them.
Yes.
Or even, what's the word? Just helps them feel seen.
Validated.
Validated is the
Emotionally
word.
validated,
Makes
right?
them feel validated.
And this is where we struggle in relationship, because when we hurt someone, because again, it goes back to what I said in the beginning, we can love someone and we can sometimes leave them feeling unloved by us. Yeah. I'm sure in your relationship, you've left her feeling unloved, even though that's not the case, and vice versa.
Yes.
It's just, and so
it's not intentional. We're just running out these patterns.
But it's so natural that when someone brings us, when we do feel pain, we attribute that to somebody else.
We attach it to them.
And
they made me feel this way.
And then what happens is when we go to them with our pain, they feel like, well, hang on a minute, I love you. I never wanted to hurt you, and yet I also have at the same time. So the more that we understand what are the ways that we default, that we shimmy out of our emotions when they feel intolerable, and this is often how our parents treated our emotions, right? Yeah. So I can hear it often, like with I'll put most women that struggle with perfectionism, dismiss and minimize.
Yes.
And a lot of people project and deflect. Most funny people, really, really humorous people, is deflection. It's like they've learned to adapt to this sense of humor in order to constantly
laugh everything off. Everyone who's watching this knows somebody who laughs off these things, not allowing themselves to feel the pain of it.
Yes, that's right. It's all our way of avoiding that pain.
Yeah.
And so when we learn what are our traits, what are the ways that we shift out of this pain, and then another thing I would say to you to do is go onto Pinterest and search emotional wheel. And there's like thousands of them. Download one of those on your phone and put it up on your fridge.
That's the thing, like the tree I was saying, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the tree.
I've seen that one as well.
It's
now that you mention it. And then the bigger core things are in the middle, and then it sprays out. It might have like one, not emotion, but like sadness, and then off that thing there might be 10 other ways that it manifests.
So a lot of people will say not feel comfortable identifying with anger, but yet frustration and irritation might come up a lot. So that's deep. That's actually anger at its core. A lot of people might not feel comfortable saying, I feel sad a lot, but they might say, I often feel depressed.
Yes.
It's actually sadness. And then the same goes for fear. I hear lots of people talking about, well, I've got anxiety. No. You're just
scared.
You've just felt fear a lot in your life. And so, of course, it manifests as anxiety.
Yeah.
So every day, just check in and write down the top 3 to 5 emotions, and just do it for your own practice, right? Just practice
become aware of the most common emotions that you're having each day.
Yeah, just practice becoming attuned to your emotional home. What are my common emotions that I'm noticing? And then once you get that down pat, start to try and do it for others. When you're with someone and they're talking to you, telling you a story, expressing, sort of just start to ask yourself, what is it that this person might be feeling right now? And then start to reflect that back to them. Like, hey, Scott, imagine that you're probably feeling quite angry as you tell me the story, or frustrated. Or I'm noticing it sounds like you're often feeling overwhelmed.
Yes.
Then that all of a sudden that leaves you feeling validated and feeling seen and heard, which is a fundamental human need that we all need.
Yeah.
So if all you do from this podcast is you do that, you understand what are the emotions that I often feel and what are the ways that I notice myself trying to wiggle out of them and push them onto somebody else, and understand that is what's keeping my relationships feeling so disconnected, is because I project, I dismiss, I minimize,
and those relationships, we've kind of focused on things like marriage and
you do
like
this in all your relationships,
but we do this in business relationships, staff relationships, family relationships. Yep. So
if you dismiss your wife at home, chances are you'll dismiss people at work when they bring you pain. And I'll tell you what, people think that this isn't important for leadership and work, but they've done studies where they've gone out and they've tried to understand the top companies and what makes them so successful. Is it their culture? Is it the way that they employ their staff on personality traits and da-da-da? It's actually the most successful organizations are those that have one thing, psychological safety, which is essentially emotional safety.
Yeah.
So it's where
which requires a high level of emotional intelligence from leadership and I guess healthy ways of creating structures for communication.
That's right, because whenever someone leaves their job, if they're unhappy, it's never really because of the reason that they say it is. It's always something. They're always feeling emotionally disconnected.
Yeah, gotcha. So just to recap that, so for deliverables for everyone, number 1, go to your Instagram.
Yep.
We'll tag that underneath this.
Yeah.
And there'll be a link there that will take you to this emotional home thing.
Yeah.
Put your details in and fill that out and see which one of those 4 things you are. Step 2, Google or go into Pinterest and look at that wheel so that you can understand all of the different ways that those emotions that you maybe aren't as aware of that are part of that emotional home are spraying out on the surface level because they're deeply suppressed underneath.
Yeah.
And then number 3, practice on a daily basis, initially starting with yourself, witnessing reflecting on your day or tuning in throughout your day and then not necessarily journaling, but just dotting down
literally
what are the most
emotions.
common things, especially if you've had an incident where you have maybe reacted a little bit more over than what would be normally seen as a normal reaction, that should indicate what was that emotion I was feeling at that time. So using some awareness and reflection.
This is so important, right? Like a few weeks ago, I went through something with a friend and we were hosting this retreat. She pulled out last minute. And I noticed myself for 2 days, just ruminating, like on this. And I was like thinking all these thoughts, and it was just keeping me so disconnected and not present.
Yes.
And then I just stopped and I just sat there and I was like, what am I feeling? And I was like, oh, I'm actually just feeling really hurt.
Yes.
I'm feeling let down. I'm feeling rejected and I'm feeling confused.
And where else have I felt like that in my life?
Right.
Oh, shit, this is my shit
That's
again.
right.
She maybe could have spoken a little bit nicer. She could have done this, but it's not my responsibility to change her. Right now, I can only change myself. And this is impacting my last 3-4 days.
And the funny thing is, the minute that I did that, and I do this work, I teach this work, right? And
I'm relating to what you're saying. You catch yourself, you're like, oh, fuck, I did it again.
It took me 2 days because I was so busy. But as soon as I sat there and created some space for myself, it just left. It just, the emotions moved on. So it's like if you're noticing yourself in your head a lot, get down into your heart and just do this for 7 days.
Yeah, I relate to that. I was asked on a relationship podcast a few years ago, what was the most important thing that I help men with, even though it's business and mindset and different things. And I said the number one thing that I've found that is the most important thing. I don't care how you do it. There's many ways that we can do this, and you've got skills in this and I've got tools and whatnot. But the number one thing is to get them out of their head and into their heart. And they were like, wow, we thought we were going to get some big businessy answer and strategy and this and that.
Yeah.
So many ways you can do it. But if you're acting from your head, you're only going to have head conversations, which is through all of the stories and patterns and things. When you can drop into your heart, there's so much more access to at least moving through or acknowledging or even just yourself, seeing yourself in that moment. So I think this has been it's been a really enjoyable podcast. Thank you so much. I've absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
And I think that if you're watching this at home, definitely take action on those 3 things that Nerida mentioned. Follow her on Instagram. And I think this is going to be a really powerful episode for people to really improve their life from. So just want to say a massive thank you for making the effort to fly up here. I know it's not, the easiest thing, much easier to just do it online, but I feel like we can just connect in such a more, intimate way that really creates the best kind of experience for other people. So I appreciate you doing that. And thanks for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge and your presence today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And thank you for all the work that you do to help men. Like, it's so important. And we need men, we need men more than ever. And so the work that you're doing, I just want to acknowledge like how challenging that is. And thanks for having me on here. I hope it resonates for people.
Awesome. Thanks for coming. All right, guys, that's another episode of the Make Men Great Again podcast. I'm your host, Scott James Andrews, and we hope to see you on another episode soon. Bye for now.
What an awesome episode. And if you want to watch more, just click the button here or here. Watch the next one, and we'll see you soon.